And now I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Okay, so I wanted to start off with just 3 important things to get everyone on the same page before we start talking about grief. The first thing to know is that we're all grieving right now. So whether you lost someone or not, you're feeling grief and anxiety because our whole world has changed in the course of 5 months. We're grieving the summer, we're grieving how work and school used to work, we're grieving seeing our friends. And so if you have lost someone recently, that compounds into that. Grief is such an isolating experience already, and then all of this on top of it brings that to a heightened level. And so it's important to be aware that even if you had lost someone a long time ago, that you can really start to feel that grief stronger now when we're all grieving in this way. And there was an article around in March when this first started that was published called "That Discomfort That You're Feeling is Grief." And it was a really great article that I recommend you read to get more of that sense of that anxiety that we're all feeling and loss of control is part of the grieving process. The second thing I want to just say before we begin is that we're all different in our grief. Grief is different for men than it is for women, and that can be really hard for couples who are grieving the same loss very differently. It's different for children than it is for adults. Someone who was a primary caretaker for their parent who lived with them and was single and then lost that parent has a very different grief around losing their parent than someone who lost a parent at the age of 90 when they have, a whole different life without them. And so even though both those griefs are hard and both those losses are hard, they're different. And so just to say, well, when I lost my mom, it wasn't that big a deal, to someone who maybe that was their whole world, we just have to be aware that every single relationship is unique and person is unique. So the experience of losing that unique, beautiful person and that special relationship isn't comparable to others. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about how differently people grieve in the next slide. The other thing I wanted to start with is Dr. Alan Wolfett is a grief psychologist, and he wrote a book called Understanding Your Grief. And in it, he wrote, "The word bereaved means to be torn apart and to have special needs. And the most important special need that you have right now is to be compassionate with yourself." Because we put so much pressure on ourselves when we're grieving to feel better or to feel normal again. And you were just torn apart. And giving yourself that compassion is so important. So when I said we're all different in our grief, there's a few more things I want to say about this. This woman, Nancy Stoker-Lutt, ran a grief support group for many, many years. And she, in an article by the same name, captured some of the things people in her grief support group had said. And these are things that in running grief support groups myself, I've often heard. And you can see how people can be total opposite ends of the spectrum in the way they're feeling in dealing with grief. So I'm going to read a few of the quotes. "I just can't stop eating. I want to fill this vacancy since my loved one has died." When the other says, "I can't eat a thing. I'm repulsed by all food." "I must keep moving and working. Busy is the only answer for me. And with that comes exhaustion and sleep. It works." But the exact opposite applies. "I just can't do anything except sit and stare into space. I'm totally unmotivated and exhausted without lifting a finger. I cannot sleep. I'm awake 20 hours a day. I have a fitful 4 hours of sleep each night." To which a different member replies, "I can sleep 18 hours a day if left unattended. It's all that gets me through this." And so sharing those different experiences just goes to show that Sometimes what is working for one person or how one person is dealing or coping might just be the complete opposite for someone else. So it's really hard to judge someone on what they're doing. You might think, hey, you really need to start doing more, when that person really what they needed was some extra rest and sleep. So I wanted to go through some natural and normal symptoms and responses to grief. I think a lot of times when people are grieving, something happens and you start to think like, wow, I'm losing it. This is getting to me. And just knowing that some other people have similar experiences or what's a normal response is helpful. So I wanted to read some of these, but not everyone who is grieving is going to have all these things happen to them. This is an exhaustive list. So there's other things that might happen, but this is gives a good sense at some of the things that a lot of people experience. Feeling tightness in the throat or heaviness in the chest, an empty feeling in the stomach, loss of appetite, or wanting to snack often. Feeling emotionally numb and unmotivated to do the things that you need to do. Feeling guilty and at times angry at others. Feeling restless and looking for activity but finding it difficult to concentrate. Feeling as though the loss isn't real and expecting to see the one who has died. Sensing your loved one's presence and talking to him or her. Wandering aimlessly, forgetting things, and not being able to finish what you started. This one's really difficult for people who have always been organized and never forgetful, suddenly find themselves feeling very chaotic, and that's really hard. Difficulty sleeping and feeling exhausted. Intense preoccupation with the life of the deceased. Dreaming of your loved one frequently or wanting to. Assuming the mannerisms or traits of your loved one. Talking things over with the deceased person. Feeling more irritable than normal. Wearing clothes or jewelry of your loved one. Feeling as though you need to take care of other people who seem uncomfortable by not talking about the loss. A need to tell and retell stories of the relationship and loss. Mood changes over the slightest things. Crying at unexpected times. Anger that the world goes on and that you seem so alone. And I highlighted this one because right now we're in the middle of a pandemic. Grief is physical and it compromises your immune system. When you're not sleeping, when you're not treating yourself well, you tend to get sick, and your body is working really hard on the emotions and the anxiety that are going on. Anxiety does take a physical toll. Grief does take a physical toll. So just be aware of that extra care that you really need. And again, there's no judgment on these things. I'm not saying any of these responses are good or bad, but they're natural and normal. They're things a lot of people experience. And so I just want to reiterate that grief is physical and that self-care is super important. So knowing that you're going through something, possibly the hardest thing of your life, giving yourself that extra care, which is really hard to do when you're feeling anxious and guilty, if you're feeling angry, but it's so important. And Dr. Alan Wolfett said, if you were embarking on a hike in the rugged mountains of Colorado, would you dress scantily, carry little water, and push yourself till you dropped? Of course not. You would carefully prepare and proceed cautiously. You would take care of yourself because if you didn't, you could die. The consequences of not taking care of yourself in grief can be equally devastating. And so how do you take care of yourself in grief? What does a grieving person need? And these are not all the things, but some of the things that I think really help. Time. Just because we're only given 3 bereavement days when someone dies does not mean that's how long it takes to feel better. You've developed a relationship over years, and the heartbreak of losing that person doesn't just go away. And so you need time alone and time with others whom you trust and who will listen when you need to talk. Months and years of time to feel and understand the feelings that go with loss. Rest, relaxation, exercise, nourishment, diversion. You may need extra amounts of the things that you needed before. Hot baths, afternoon naps, a cause to work for. Grief is an exhausting process emotionally, and you need to replenish yourself. Follow what feels healing to you and what connects you to the people and the things that you love. Security. Grief is about losing control. You don't have any control over the thing that just totally changed your life. So try to reduce stress or find help for financial and other stresses in your life. Allow yourself to be close to the people that you trust. You can't do this alone. You need help. Getting back into a routine does help. And you should do this at your own pace. Don't let anyone tell you where you need to be on this journey. Hope. You may find hope and comfort from those who've experienced a similar loss, knowing some things that help them and realizing that they recovered and that time does help may give you hope that sometime in your future, your grief will be less raw and painful. You need caring. You have to allow yourself to accept the expressions of caring from others. And if the main person you took caring and accepted caring and love from is the person who you lost, it's especially important to start to allow other people into your life. They, again, may give you hope that sometime in the future, your grief will be less raw and painful. And I wrote that sentence again because it's true. Your grief will become less raw and less painful. It's not going to go away. You're always going to miss the person. There'll always be grief, but it's not always going to be as raw as it is in the beginning. Goals. For a while, it will seem that much of life is without meaning. At times like these, small goals are helpful, something to look forward to, like taking a walk with a friend or learning to cook your favorite meal, planning a future trip when we're able to travel more. This is going to help you get through what's going on now in the immediate future by having something to look forward to. Living one day at a time is a rule of thumb. They often generally say don't make big changes in the first year after a grief, but for some people that's not an option and you have to make big changes because of finances or other reasons. At first, don't be surprised if your enjoyment of these things is not the same. This is normal. As time passes, you may need to work on some longer range goals to give some structure and direction to your life. You may need guidance or counseling to help with this. And again, the not having the same enjoyment at first, don't give up on those things because you're relearning to do them in a new way with a new heart. And so give some time to keep trying to do the things you love. Don't just think they'll never be the same again. And don't underestimate the healing effect of small pleasures when you're ready. Sunsets, a walk in the woods, a favorite food, all are small steps toward regaining your pleasure in life itself. And before I come back to open it up for questions and answers or comments, I want to talk about, for those of you who have someone who's grieving in your life and you want to know how to help. And I think if you're grieving, you'll probably agree with some of this. So listen. The common thing I hear in my grief support groups is that people feel like they're burning out their friends or they're burning out people talking about it and they feel like they should stop talking about it. So knowing that there's going to be someone there who's always willing to listen is so helpful. Talk about the deceased. We in America especially have this inclination to avoid the topic of death and dying. We think if we bring up the person's name that it's going to remind the person who lost them that they're dead. Guess what? They know. They think about it 24 hours a day, all day. It's on their mind. You're not going to remind them. In fact, they want to hear their loved one's name. They want to know other people are thinking about them. And especially in this isolating time anyway, we don't want to isolate people because of fear of saying the wrong thing. It happens so much. Friends who were, they were couples, and one person loses someone, and then suddenly the couple doesn't feel like they can be around that person. Don't isolate them because you feel uncomfortable or you don't know what to do. I'm going to say a little bit more about don't ask, just do. And when it comes to helping, avoiding platitudes, I think besides feeling burnt out on people listening, I think the thing I hear the second most is that someone very well-meaning said something that really hurt when they were trying to make them feel better, just they're in a better place, or, things that might be true or might, be meaning to make the person feel good. When you're in pain and you've lost someone, some of those platitudes are just so jarring and hurtful, and don't recognize where the person's at. And be patient, because as you see in the illustration, we want grief to be this straight line, but it's not. And just when you think you've gotten to a certain point, something throws you for a loop, and it's a constant working on where you're at now. And hopefully each time you feel like you're backsliding, it will be less deep into the pain, but it's not a straight line. And I think a lot of us know that at this point. These two slides are just, I wanted to share a little bit about when I say listen, 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 what's helpful listening and what can be dismissive listening. And also when I said just don't ask, just do. So on the slide on the left, it says the difference between having good intentions and showing up. The person says, let me know if I can do anything. And you see the person on the right is thinking, I need to rest, to talk, to eat, to run an errand, to cry, to clean, to pay the bills, I need help. But they just say, okay, because they don't even know what to ask for or how to ask. Versus showing up where the person says, I'm bringing you dinner tonight, what time is good? And they can just say, thank you so much. Now I don't need to worry about resting and eating. And, in that slide, it's important too to, when you say I'm bringing dinner tonight, if the person says, no, I don't need dinner, thank you, honoring that too. But just instead of putting it on the griever to think of how you can help, offering some ideas can really be a game changer in the person accepting that help. And then I wanted to talk quickly about listening. On the left is empathetic listening. And that's someone who really wants to hear you and wants to know what's going on. So you see these phrases like, I'm listening. That sounds heavy. What did that make you feel? How can I show up for you moving forward? I'm here. It sounds like you're saying, is that accurate? Is there more? That's someone who wants to hear what you have to say. Dismissive listening, which is more of the style of, I want to fix you, I want to fix the problem, instead of just hear what kind of pain you're in or what you need, might say things like, it could be worse, the same thing happened to a friend of mine and this is what they did. What if you tried this? Oh, you know what you should listen to, read, follow? Don't be upset, you'll be fine. And I totally know someone else who went through that, or I totally get it. This one time this happened to me. So it's not that there's not a place for some of those things of sharing resources or showing that you have been in a similar place, but right off the bat, that's the way you're responding to someone trying to share. It's saying, I don't want you to be sad. I don't want to hear about that you're sad. I want to think of how you can move forward. And if the person's not ready to move forward, it's not the type of listening that's helpful. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen because those are all my slides, and then I can see you all a little better. I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody. You can mute yourself. You can remute yourself if you want to. But I wanted to open it up for just comments or questions, or if people could relate to some of that or had a question about any of it. All made sense?
I guess everybody's afraid
Am
to
I
speak.
unmuted?
Yeah, you're unmuted.
Muted or unmuted?
You're unmuted. We can hear you. Now you're muted, Pat. You were unmuted, but you muted yourself. There you go.
When my husband died 4 years ago, it was my second husband to die, along came a person who's sitting in the box right next to me, Kathy Long. And she was so helpful because she too had buried 2 husbands. And she just had the knowledge, and I think that's very important, to talk to someone who's been down the same road and can tell maybe what she did, or she was good. Put her on your committee. It helped a lot.
That's nice, Pat. Thanks.
What did she do that was helpful?
What did she do that was helpful?
Good.
Well, she was sort of there. I don't know. Oh, and she was living in a house with a swimming pool at the time. And we go over there in the morning and do some water aerobics, and we'd just be with each other. And I was alone. For the first time in my life, I was alone. That was hard. I got married when I was 20, so I've been with somebody for a long time. And so that summer just helped a lot. And let's see, what else did you do, Kathy? You showed me that you can live through it. That's the main thing. Being there and just showing that you can survive.
Yeah, that certainly helps.
Kathy, what did people do for you when you experienced both the loss of your first husband and then your second husband?
Nobody let me go. I don't see Karen. Did you?
Oh, I don't have my picture up.
Nobody let me go. Everybody did a whole lot of what Kate's talking about. I like to see it organized like that, Kate. It's very helpful. I had also been a preschool teacher, and we had used a lot of grief in our work there. So I was somewhat into grief. I just think it's an amazing topic because there are lots of griefs that come along in the course of a life, and it's pretty hard to know that you're handling everything right, but I don't know. I just never forget nice things that other people have done for me at part of the time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between knowing about grief and then experiencing it. And I think you can be a grief counselor, know all this information about grief, but then when someone you love is taken from you, it's a totally different experience.
Well, I think I sort of took on an attitude that how low can you go before you have to start rising? So try to stay even, try to take the help that everybody offered. I also had 2 boys living with me, so they did a lot of cooking. So, I wasn't alone, which made a big difference in that that first grief. Yeah, that made a big difference. My kids really rallied. So sometimes you're lucky. Like Pat was alone. That was a very, very tricky thing for her. She did well, Pat. You deserve a lot of credit.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
You have to get up and every morning and put your feet on the floor. That was
I
like,
also said to myself, never say no. If someone's going to ask you to dinner or somebody's going to ask you if you want something, never say no.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It looked like Marie was going to ask something.
Kathy and I are experiencing another kind of grieving. We were going to go to Israel in October, and that, of course, has been canceled. And it's not the death of a person, but there's all sorts of losses these days. I certainly grieve the loss of the choir, the going to church, the being in community, all of that. And in addition, I went to see my sister in a nursing home yesterday, and she's been there for 3 years, and she was ill before that, but I haven't seen her since January because the nursing home wasn't accepting visitors even before COVID. And what a difference. She's totally not my sister that I knew. And not able to communicate. And her arms look like pencils, and she's on hospice, so they are making her comfortable. But boy, I left there crying.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's so bad.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
So between the non-person kinds of grieving, the losses that we're all experiencing because of the COVID, for me, it's a mixture right now of a person dying and all the losses that have come with the closing of the church. I know it's open, but it's not really open.
Yep.
No. The whole part that we like about it, or one big part, isn't there. Yeah, all the people. Yep.
Thank you for listening.
Well, Marie, I think that's very hard, and it certainly has given us all pause to think about our homebound and about people in nursing homes that have been more restricted. And how do they stand it? I mean, I'm having retail therapy withdrawal in grief, just because it's sort of like something you can poke in a store, or just go outside, and some of them aren't even allowed outside of those nursing homes. No. Terribly sad for them.
I understand, Marie, that you miss choir because I miss choir too. Thursday night is still choir night for me. I think about it every Thursday, and I don't think we'll be back singing for Christmas, if that, maybe. So, and it's a very close group. I've been singing with the Sacred Heart Choir for probably 20 years at least, and you miss that contact.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the hard things right now is with all the time to think about things, grief really can sneak up on people, and there's not as much to distract. Like a lot of people's the way they cope is by distracting themselves by
Oh, big time. Yeah.
and to not have that as an option makes it really, really hard. And I also think, especially when you're early on in grief, and I think grieving, you know, even like the things you're talking about with choir, or, you know, the loss of a trip you had planned, is when it just like sneaks up on you, the grief attacks, where something just reminds you of it and it takes you over and you weren't prepared to feel that way and you weren't ready, you know. I mean, you're just in a store and you see like the person you lost favorite cookies and you just lose it, or you hear a song. I remember one of the first times I was in Mass at Our Lady's, I heard they were playing on Eagle's Wings, and I've heard that song a million times since my dad's funeral, but something about just that moment, being in a new place, hearing it, like I lost it. And then I was like crying so hard, and I didn't really know anyone yet, and I didn't want everyone to see me crying at church. And it's like when it takes you off guard, it's so hard.
A lot of us would have run up with our arms out to you, Kate. You know, this is the best Zoom I've been on, just because people are talking to one another. Sometimes I find it so stilted that it's almost worse than having a meeting in person. So this has been a good one, Kate. Thank you. And thank you.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm glad you feel like you can chat and talk, because when you're just getting always information thrown at you and you're not able to share any of the things you're thinking about, it doesn't really feel very good.
Kate, this is Dulce.
Hi, Dulce.
Hi, I have a question about children's grief
Mm-hmm.
and what it is for children to grow up without a dad that died when they were young.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just curious, I know you lost your dad in your early 20s, but I know that was a very, very sad experience for you. So I'm curious to know, what is your relationship with your dad, and how does your faith help you in that? So if you didn't have faith, if you didn't think of your dad in heaven, would you be in a different place where you are now? I'm just curious to know how, what is your connection to your dad right now, and how one that grows without a dad, what kind of relationship they can keep throughout their lives,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, and I'm not an expert on children in grief, but from what I've read and been told by a lot of people who do the grief support groups for kids, is that children have the big thing in theory right now is called continuing bond theory, which is, in our faith tradition, we're really familiar with it because of the communion of saints and this idea that people, that we continue to pray for people or have this relationship, and that they're still part of our community, but in a different way. And for children, they're much more able to see themselves as a legacy, or to connect with someone on a level of that person lives on through them than an adult is. So for kids, it's so important to continue to talk about the person and share memories, and to point to those things in the children when you see that person in them. That's really big.
Excuse me, Kate, can everybody please mute while Kate works, because it's hard to hear? Can you please mute?
Yeah, so I can mute people too from, it's particularly important to talk about the person, and for kids to point out, for me, I was much older, but for a child who, is in that range of, 8 to 14, having a chance for even people like friends of that parent to say, oh, when you did that, it reminded me so much of your dad, so that they can see that connection. It really helps children's grieving process to do that. And, you know, for me, my faith is so linked to my dad because my mom was not religious, but he was. And so that faith connection is what makes me feel close to him. But that's particular to my relationship with my dad, where he was the one who was Catholic and he was the one who encouraged me to work for the church. And so keeping close to the faith makes me feel like I'm honoring him and staying close to him. So it's so important. But I think for kids, even if they don't have that sense of heaven or aren't being raised in a way where they have that understanding of it, knowing that that person's memory lives on, knowing that they are a legacy of that person, and being allowed to talk about the person, and like not having the wall come up around memories and sharing. I think being exposed to different people too, when you're only hearing from your mom stories about your dad, you really start to crave other people's memories and so surrounding people who knew their dad and can give them that, I think that can be very powerful and helpful. But yeah, I mean, I think parents who are teaching their kids who have the language of faith, I think it's sometimes easier because it's this built-in way of talking about keeping a continuing bond. And so I think that is so helpful and I think comforting for kids. But there's lots of kids who don't have those faith traditions who still can do really well because that love and that bond, they feel it continue and they know that it continues. So, but for me, definitely faith was a huge part of it. And anytime my dad was also a funeral director and was in church a lot for funerals. And so when I'm at a funeral, I just feel like I'm doing something with him, that he's there with me. So it really helps me to feel connected to him. I know that probably didn't answer all of your questions to say, but
no, that was great. Thank you.
Okay, there I am. Oh, am I unmuted now?
yes, you're unmuted.
Okay. When my first husband died, that was 19 years ago. My middle son, who was in his early 20s at the time, just didn't think he could go to the wake. He said, I can't go. He was married at the time, you know, so he wasn't a kid alone. But he said, I can't go. I said, you don't have a choice. This is not true. You have to go. And I think you'll be glad you went. Well, he went and he came home at the end and he was just incredulous about how many people told him things about his father.
Yeah.
You know, the funny stories and work stories and all different stories. And I feel so sorry for all these people during COVID because they haven't had that ability to get together with people and hear about their loved one. They say they'll do it later, but it's hard to do it later. Yeah. But anyway, for my son, it really woke him up to what a wake was all about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is really sad that that's being disrupted because it's a huge part of the healing process. And for anything that people, you know, might criticize the church for or think the church, you know, doesn't do well, I think the thing they do really well is funerals and burials and wakes. I mean, just the whole Catholic process just fits modern psychology so well, of like what helps people. That closure, that time together to hear those stories, to give a place for that, you know, to go in the wake and the celebration of life in the funeral. It's all very healing and done very well. So it's sad for people I have a friend who lost her grandmother who was in her 90s to COVID, and she had always been like, she knew she was going to lose her eventually, and she had lived a good life, and but like then to not be able to see her to have her have to die alone in isolation, to not be able to have the goodbye that they pictured where they'll all be together surrounding her. Like it really made it what would have been probably a sad but, you know, like expected death, made it so traumatic and so difficult. And she was really angry about it. Just felt like if people had done things differently, it wouldn't have happened. You know, it was just like so much anger around it because she just felt like it was so unfair to have lived such a long life and so well and to have to go like that. And so this pandemic is really doing a number on people and grieving, and that, especially just to not be able to be together, to not have all those friends, like not just immediate family, but all the people who come to well wish. You need that in that time. It's hard. Well, I have about 10 minutes left. If anybody else had a comment or a question or anything that they wanted to ask.
I think she fell. She is.
My phone just fell.
Yeah.
So we only have one more session of these 2 p.m. speaker series. The next one is going to be Nick. And before he came to Shoal Newton, he worked in interreligious dialogue. He worked on a campus doing like all kinds of ecumenical services. So he's going to talk about interreligious dialogue and what the church teaching is on it and what he learned in that year of working. So I think it'll be really interesting. And yeah, I thank you all for being here on a Friday afternoon to talk about this subject, but it's so important to think about and to spend time with. So, and it was nice to hear from you all and see your faces.
We appreciate it too, Kate. Bye-bye.
Have a good vacation.
Weekend, everybody.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Kate. Bye. Bye-bye.